Well, firstly, thank you, TASM, for having me. I think you might have noticed that we have a little bit of a Facebook crew here with us. We've made sure to try to be at every single panel in one way, shape, or form. I'm sorry if we ask some off-the-wall questions, but really it's just to iterate that we were here to not just talk about Facebook, but to learn. So this is a constantly evolving and dynamic space, and it's up to social media to also continue to liaise with the academic sector as well as a range of other sectors if we're ever going to be efficient in staying ahead of the curve. As mentioned by Stuart, I have a bit of an academic and NGO background, so it was an interesting transition to come on board with Facebook, and it's a pleasure to be here today to be able to take you through how we're approaching terrorism and the gray area of extremism in a little bit more detail than perhaps normally shared. I want to just walk through really quickly a broad context of Facebook policy, just to give you an idea and put this in context, and then go into our dangerous organization policy, which obviously includes counterterrorism efforts, and talk a little bit about countering violent extremism and even counter-narratives, or in the tech world we kind of refer to it as counter-speech. There are a lot of terms like alternative narrative, counter-narrative. Assume that I mean a combination of all of those as we go. And then talk a little bit about how we see partnership building so that we can actually stay ahead of this curve. We, as of yesterday, reached 2 billion members on Facebook globally. So just to give you an idea of the scale of what we are dealing with, we have about 1 billion photos uploaded every single day. And to kind of break the bubble of it being California-centric, over 85% of all of our users come from outside of the US and Canada. So we're dealing with a huge amount of cultural nuance, a huge amount of language necessities for us to be able to approach regulation and policy in the first place. And of course, 1 billion photos uploaded daily. This is mostly babies and cats and Justin Bieber and a range of other controversial but not illegal topics. But this is, we're dealing with, when we talk about dangerous organizations, a very small percentile of this, but a small percentile that has potential real-world impact, so something that we want to take extremely seriously. Obviously, you could all go online and see some broad community standards that we have really to make sure that we can operate and keep the community online safe. Feel free to go through and pick it apart a little bit if you'd like. And it's important to include in that a range of policies that we have developed. So as you can see, this is far beyond the topic of terrorism. This includes identity theft and sexual violence, offensive humor, that's very difficult, human trafficking, spam, there's a lot of spam, pornography. One of my colleagues deals a lot with that topic. So thankfully I don't. I deal specifically more with our more hate speech, which goes into violent groups and what we would consider dangerous organizations. And when it comes to violent extremist policies, we really want to present that that should not have any presence on Facebook. Of course, operationalizing that is a constant challenge. You should not be able to praise, support, or represent that organization, a violent extremist organization, on the platform. And that's not just Facebook, that should be across Instagram and Messenger as well. And you're not allowed to celebrate or promote graphic violence. So this is where we stand. And again, I'll talk a little bit more about how that gets turned into practice. So we have a range of enforcement tools, and really to start with, it starts with users. I suppose, how many people in the room have a Facebook account? Don't be shy. I'll know if you don't. An Instagram account? A WhatsApp account? Okay, so we're pretty much all affected by these types of policies and how we're able to communicate. It's important that I always tell people that reporting a post is 100% confidential. What that means is that when you see something controversial, and it could be a Justin Bieber music video, you can flag that to us. It probably won't come down. But you have options. You could say that something is annoying. You could say that it shouldn't be on Facebook. You could say that it's spam. This allows us to have a rough sort of triage system about how we would review something, what we would want to take into context. It's also important that it's completely confidential so that if you do happen to have a racist uncle or a government person that you would like to flag to us, that you can also do that, and that would never be part of anything that reaches that person of who that was flagged by. When we talk about tooling and reporting at Facebook, really we're at the point where what gets flagged to us and the trends that we see, it's important that we have users, and that includes law enforcement flagging things to us. That makes up about a little less than 50% of what we're reviewing for takedown or leave up. And internally, we are surfacing either through human review and our different research teams or through machine learning technology, over 50% of what we're reviewing as content that needs review for either takedown or action thereafter. So we've really scaled up these efforts in the last few years. A lot of it is in-house. A lot of it starts with a user flagging a piece of content, and then maybe our machine learning after that can make sure that we effectively take that down elsewhere. And that's where we get into some of our artificial intelligence and machine learning technology. One of those is just around image matching, photo and video matching. And what we do is we have a database where we can upload distinctly controversial, for example, terrorist propaganda. And we have a big focus mostly on global terrorist propaganda. So that would be ISIS and Al-Qaeda related groups. And we have a database where we can hash that image. So we upload it, and what that means is we can pick apart at the image and make sure that the machine understands the different elements of that image to quite a high degree. And once we have that match, we can scan across so that if someone's trying to upload that image and post and disseminate propaganda as it comes out, as we know about it, in some cases we can remove it before it even hits the platform in the first place. So that's really helped us get ahead of the curve when we know about a certain publication by a terrorist organization. But we still need human review. Human review is absolutely imperative, and we have talked about counter-speech, counter-narratives. We've also touched a little bit about mainstream media, who also sometimes shares images that would be considered official terrorist propaganda. So when something's being shared with different types of context, we do need a machine to perhaps surface it, but then a human to review it. And so that is kind of how we want to make sure that machines do what machines are good at and humans do what humans are good at. And even though we would love to think artificial intelligence is almost at the Terminator phase, we are nowhere near that sort of technology. We are really looking at the fact that how do I know, even as a human, when you post something and I say, I really want to kill you? Or am I saying, I really want to kill you right now? So how do we get a little more context than that post itself, looking at friendship networks, looking at connections, and giving ourselves a little more nuance? For this, it's also important to know that once something's been surfaced around terrorism, we have general operations teams that are looking at tons of flagged content and look really quickly if it breaks the guidelines or not. Anything nuanced around a topic like child exploitation or like terrorism, which are very sensitive, goes to our teams that are specifically trained or have different types of subject matter expertise around that, which I'll get a little bit into a little bit later. We also, around some of our newer technologies, are getting better and better at terrorist cluster removals. So we know that not only online, but especially from many decades of research offline, that this doesn't happen in isolation. Usually there's communication. A lot of it's offline and a lot of it is replicated in equal measure online. It's not usually an individual that gets taken down for terrorist-related content sharing. There's a network involved. So we are using machine learning to get better and better at looking at different things about an account, different connections they might have to surface to our review teams. Well, maybe this is not just a one-off individual. Maybe there are other individuals within a network that we should be highlighted to and looking a little more in depth around. It also includes things like language understanding. Machine learning means that the more data gets inputted, the better the machine gets because our data set gets larger and larger. So language understanding around when we do see mass dissemination of a piece of terrorist propaganda, are there attributes or phrases that keep coming up again and again and again? Are we seeing a certain pattern? Are we seeing somebody copy and pasting the same phrase because oftentimes when it's disseminated in its original channel, it just gets copied and pasted and put on one of our platforms perhaps. And we're also working on recidivism. So our machine learning can tell through a variety of different things if we have taken down an account and that user is trying to come back on again, what are the things we're looking at to say, actually, we think that's the same person that came down for bad reasons the other time. And we're looking at different data points that might lead us to not allow that person to recreate an account or very quickly be able to take them down. So we're decreasing the time. So machine learning and artificial intelligence developments are really good at dealing with things like scale and speed, and then we need humans for expertise, nuance, gray area, and thinking. And that probably won't change. We won't see machines that are able to understand that nuance so well, but with language understanding, we can get better and better to surface the right things and decrease false positives. We're very wary that what we don't want is mass censorship and accidental limitations to freedom of speech. So when we talk about who's managing this content, well, there's people like me that are on a policy team, so we're helping see where do our policies need tweaking, where are we being effective, how do we know that, how are we internally measuring ourselves, and where are our policies not quite catching what we need to catch. But I'm working with teams from huge diverse backgrounds, so people that have law enforcement backgrounds, people coming from counterterrorism, but also academics, engineers, people that are former intelligence. I mean, engineers are great. We get to sit down, Julian's with me today, and some others that I'll take my qualitative ramblings and he turns it into incredible zeros and ones and makes it into a pipeline and a process. And then our other teams that really know the nuances of our policy beyond terrorism. So at what point, if I'm bouncing something off, are they saying, well, that might not be under our terrorism policy, but definitely around hate speech or protected categories of people, or when we're talking about bullying, maybe that's where it comes into play. And this has to really operate 24/7. So we have different offices around the world, and we're looking at this in 40+ languages constantly, with a lot of different teams working in smaller subsections of languages when needed, and a triage review system to be as effective as possible. Now, obviously, counterterrorism and getting the bad stuff off is just one issue. And what we also need to look at is the gray area, this big extremism question. I would love to see better definitions about how we're discussing what an extremist is. And maybe leaving some room to have positive extremists in the spectrum, since the word moderate is not very sexy for activists. But when we talk about positive measures, we know that counter-speech happens all the time on Facebook, officially and unofficially. We see tons of stuff that goes up without any knowledge of official NGOs. This is individuals going out, countering things in their own time, challenging ideas, providing alternative narratives. When it comes to Facebook, we really feel we do have a role to play. We're probably not the messenger. We know when we talk about effective counter-narratives or counter-speech, we really are looking at the message, the messenger, and the platform. Well, we are the platform. We're probably not the messenger, and we probably need to work with others to help them with that message. But that probably shouldn't be an effort we do alone. So we do partner with a variety of different research institutes and think tanks. That includes trainings and workshops, doing different trainings around the world to make sure that NGOs and civil society organizations have different capacities to understand our tooling, taking some of those amazing offline efforts and translating even a small portion of that into the online space. That also includes things like cross-platform collaborations. So last year we announced at the EUIT forum that we were developing a joint industry hash sharing database. So some of that photo matching I was talking about, to have a joint platform with Microsoft, YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook to share some of the most egregious content so that we could do this work cross-platform. And I'm happy that as of just last week, I believe, we launched the Global Industry Forum to Counter Terrorism. So to take what we were developing with that and kind of up the ante a little bit more. And what that means is that we have 3 pillars under that to jointly with other industry, not just the big industry, but also try to open the door to some of these smaller tech companies when we see those jumps off of Facebook to other platforms. We all know about them, and they all manifest and change constantly. How do we help them with some infrastructure? There's just one guy at Just Paste It, and his background expertise is not counterterrorism. So how do we kind of bring us all up to an equal playing field around these challenges, not just with innovation, but knowledge sharing? There's basic things like, how do people process a government request for information? If you are a new startup tech, that's probably not what you were thinking about when you developed this cool new app in your garage. That's probably very daunting for you as well. So how can we help with some of those infrastructures too? As well as academic research and education. So how can that knowledge sharing bring in other sectors like academia? So watch this space, and I'm happy to update everyone as that develops. But it's also good to see it's not just each industry going alone and having to battle this. It's about cross-sector cooperation and also intra-industry cooperation as well. So some of our learnings around counter-speech when we do talk about counter-extremism efforts, we do know that even though the counter efforts might seem fewer, they have an ability to go farther. So in some in-depth research that Demos did, specifically looking at the far right in this one case study, they found that even though a far right group might tweet or post a ton in a given day or even hour, they didn't reach as many people as strategically placed counter-speech that had an ability to go outside of a small circle of people and have bigger impact than a barrage and scattergunning of posts from a hate-based organization. So that's a little bit of a, it's not all gloom and doom, and you don't have to create a meme per second if you want to be effective. You should just create better, more strategic content. There's a quality issue here as well. We also know that, I kind of touched on this, that it's really important to think about your form of speech, your tone of speech, and who's the most effective speaker. And that will also decide, well, what are you trying to do? How are you even measuring your impact? It starts kind of here. Depending on who you're trying to reach, what you want to get out of that will be a little bit different. And we've talked about in this forum the difference between prevention and countering. What do we do around education and digital literacy versus actually countering somebody that might be showing signs of group membership? So we have critical questions around who you're trying to reach. Just like I mentioned, if you're looking at broader society and awareness, that's going to be very different messaging and a very different visual online compared to sympathizers or actual members. And that will also change how you measure your effectiveness and evaluation around that. Some examples of some things we're trying to do. Peer-to-peer came up in another panel discussion with both positive and negatives around what people thought this was producing in the world, but we are supporting an effort that is a university challenge. This exists currently in over 250 universities in 59 different countries, where we're trying to get young people within a term over a given kind of 4-month period to develop something to challenge hate speech and extremism within their own communities. And within that, see how we can help them with different tooling. I know that this also looks very different in different countries, so if you have experienced it or you want to talk more about it, please do come up and find me. We also launched, specifically in the UK last week, the Online Civil Courage Initiative. This originally launched in Germany, and then launched in France in the last year and a half, and just launched in the UK. And the entire point of it is to upscale and optimize existing efforts of different civil society organizations to develop their counter-speech online. So again, it's not us saying what that should look like or should be, but us helping with everything from ad credits to you understanding marketing tools so you can target audiences and really be specific with your online efforts. It's worth pointing out when we talk about measurement and evaluation how crucial it is to look at a bunch of different factors. Does anyone have a Facebook page, not just an account for yourself, page, or your organizations? Some of you. So there's a little button up here called Insights, and it would be interesting for anyone to have a look at it, because what we can start doing is taking marketing tooling and applying how we decide success metrics look like to the counter-speech or counter-narrative space. So when you launch something, you can actually see in a little bit more depth how successful it's being. You can also say what age range, in what location you want to reach, and base it on likes and interests. So for example, if I don't have a button that says I want to target neo-Nazis. That would be quite controversial for our organization, I think. But you can say things like, I want to target people in this part of England aged 18 to 25 that have an interest in this football team, this rock band, and also mixed martial arts. If you hang out with the far right at all, they like mixed martial arts a lot. I don't know why. This tends to be a global phenomena. But you can be very innovative with how you're thinking about interests and behaviors to reach very specific target audiences, so that you know when you use those marketing credits, you're not just reaching the average public. You're probably not trying to reach the average public anyways, and it gives depth to your numbers. This is not just a quantity game of being the ice bucket challenge and reaching the world. You're probably wanting to engage with very specific audiences. The good thing is the more specific you are, the more your ad credits go farther. So the best example I saw was a campaign in the Netherlands where they used 20 euros of ad credits and reached 25,000 people. And that was mostly a testament to how good their own content was. The content had an organic and a paid trending. So the other thing you can see is how much has the paid advertising gotten you versus how much has your organic reach been. And if your content is good, it should not just be paid advertising that got you to reach people. You should be able to see a natural trend around it. It also shows you in videos, if you have a 30-second videos, you can see where people drop out. So you can see that seven seconds in, everyone drops out. Well, around second 5, maybe let's tighten it, make it more sexy, relaunch it, try it again. This is very dynamic information coming back. So I've worked with campaigns where we edited and relaunched 4 times in 2 weeks and had much better results every time we did it. And this was a case where it was an anti-Islamophobia campaign that was just a little small, funny, jokey campaign. And we realized that the far-right audience, first of all, were dropping off, so we tightened it. Secondly, we realized we were getting a lot of positive engagement, which actually meant they weren't getting the joke. They were thinking it was funny. Well, that's a problem, so let's pull that back off and make a really definite message at the end of that short video, making a very clear statement about what we're trying to convey. And then the metrics changed completely again. So these are things to think about having a dynamic relationship with your online content when you're trying to counter extremism. And so that's your overview, and as you can see, you can scroll through all of these different things and see a lot of metrics that are helpful and give you more information. I think I will leave it there. There's a lot that we could talk about, but I'm also happy to field questions, and if we run out of time, I'm here tomorrow. If you want to bombard me further, that's completely fine by me, but thank you for having me.